Hello, my lovely law enthusiast humans. And let me tell you, there are two ways that you get exhausted at work. One, you have an actual physically laborious day where you're just doing so much actual physical energy exerting that you're just pooped. The second way is mental exhaustion, where maybe you're not doing anything physically exerting, but you're doing something that's really dull or mundane, rhythmic, or repetitive, which is what I was doing today. Thank goodness I was able to watch court while I was doing my very repetitive task. But you want to know who else looked exhausted today and acted exhausted today in court? Sergeant Buchanan. I was feeling bad for the man by the end of this. I was like, this man just wants to go home. He just doesn't want to have to get into another suit and get on this stand again. He really doesn't. And part of the reason why he's been on so long is because it has been relatively noticeable, not only based on the questions and the stuff that's coming in, but just how many other things are getting directed towards him that would have otherwise went towards former trooper Michael Proctor, that he's taking that brunt instead of Michael Proctor, because I'm thinking, and this is total speculation, that the prosecution does not want to call Michael Proctor to the stand because I think it's going to be an absolute dump for them. But I think that boat has sailed for that. But let's get into what happened in court. Started off real spicy early this day. We are in our 2.5 days in to the cross-examination of Sergeant Yuri Buchanan, who is the supervising officer trooper for the homicide unit overseeing the Karen Reed case. And we got into the fact that Michael Proctor had accessed John O'Keefe's phone to look at his ring footage, and Karen Reed had already, her phone and her stuff had already been tested. She had been ruled out. The reason why they were able to get into John O'Keefe's phone so quickly, in case you were wondering if I didn't bring this up, is that his relatives told the officers what his passcode was, and that's how they were able to get in as quickly as they did. But it seems that Michael Proctor got in to access that ring footage before it was imaged, and we already know from previous tech expert Jessica Hyde that the phones, John O'Keefe's phone, was never put into one of the blocking bags that stops signal or new information from coming in. So new text messages, other messages, just general information, the phone being moved around and picking up that data. That was very weird that Michael Proctor was the one who was accessing the phone before it was imaged, before it was extracted. Like, what are you doing in there, bro? That's not appropriate procedure. And we know that because Jackson asked, is that what you do? It's not normally what we do. Oh, okay. Then we got into looking at John O'Keefe's arm, and there is the image I will put up here of John O'Keefe's arm, because during direct examination, Sergeant Buchanan had noted that he had saw at the hospital bruising, but bruising was absent in all of the hospital and medical examiner photos, which would be indicative of somebody getting impacted by something like a vehicle. He also was missing other bruising around anywhere other than his eyes, where he could have gotten hit by something thrown at him, like a glass that has been speculated, or a fist that has been speculated by the defense. The Commonwealth just didn't have any answers for that. He also, we got back into the text messages with Alan Jackson, and this man, Alan Jackson, made sure to say at least 7 times the R slur that Proctor used in relevance to Karen Reed. And he went through, he had all those texts read, he said, okay, but you liked, which means you're encouraging. He was like, I wasn't encouraging, I was on my watch, I was acknowledging that he was going through the phone. And that was just the first thing that was up there. And one thing that I do want to note, that the reason why I say Sergeant Buchanan seemed exhausted is because at the beginning of cross-examination, the first day he had it, he was a lot more argumentative. He was a lot more combative and just not being an easy witness. He was being very difficult and very much willing to just go, yeah, yes. He continued to stand by his saying that this investigation done by the fired former Trooper Proctor was still done with integrity and honor. And it was like, really? After you sent text messages about Yannetti and they showed the picture, it was when Yannetti was younger? And apparently, according to the little article, he was responsible for a car pileup at some point. Despite the R word going through nudes, and Sergeant Buchanan backed it up by saying, Proctor has a First Amendment right to the freedom of speech and to make comments and opinions as he feels fit. Were they appropriate? No. Are they ethical? No. But the investigation was still handled with integrity and honor. These were just some private text messages between a group of work buddies. But the problem with the group of work buddies is that not only is former Trooper Proctor's boss, Sergeant Buchanan, on this text message chain, so is a sergeant above them, Sergeant Tully, who was also involved in the case. So you're like, the big boss is on this text thing, but you feel comfortable enough to say things like that and even get positive reactions. There was only one person of the 5 on this text message chain who thumbs down the looking for nudes part. Now, I, as an outside person, am going to say that I read that as he was going through the phone and he was hoping to find nudes but hadn't found any yet. However, Emily D. Baker, whose stream I was watching, it's what I was able to hear that better than just direct court TV when I was at work today. She said that she reads that as, she goes, when you're in the court system, she goes, you're going to come across nudes in a phone dump. It just happens. And so she read that as haven't found the nudes yet. Like that was like a jokey coworker thing. It's kind of like when she would be listening to jail phone calls and she would think and say things such as, or not, she didn't say these things, but she said that it comes across your mind as, well, I haven't gotten to the phone sex part. And that's a different perspective. For me, I was definitely thinking something different. I wasn't thinking it was casual and nonchalant. It was that he was looking through the phone. I don't know why he was doing it and not an extraction expert, one thing. And 2 is like he wasn't intentionally like trying to find the nudes, but he was hoping to, is what I took that as. Tell me what you think that phrase is. I'll put the text messages up here so you can see them, and tell me what you think about those. Are you taking it as it's a part of the job, haven't found the nudes yet, or are you taking it as looking for those nudes? Then we started getting into what the relationship between the Alberts and the Proctors was, and Sergeant Buchanan was like, listen, I heard the speculation in the prior proceeding. I don't believe that that's true. I think that the defense in other proceedings was trying to play up his relations to the Alberts of being way more than they were. When we went to go interview them, I had asked him because I knew tangentially of familial relations that he had to the Alberts. It was like, do you hang out with them? And Proctor said, no, I don't hang out with them. They're not my friends. They're just people I know and know of through other people and in connection to work in the community, etc. And he was like, are you comfortable like doing this interview? And Proctor said yes. And so he didn't look any further into that, which goes into the defense of going, when there were other possibilities and investigative things that could have been done, the Canton PD and Boston PD did not do those things. It was like, you didn't think that maybe you should have looked maybe a little further in. There were, we didn't see pictures, but there were indications of pictures. From the last trial, we saw pictures of Proctor being at some of the Albert's weddings, that his son was babysat by Julie Albert. His son was the ring bearer in a wedding. And so to me, it sounds more like Sergeant Buchanan and Trooper Proctor were playing down their relations. And I have no reason to disbelieve, like I said, this man was exhausted. He was just trying to get through the rest of this testimony. I fully believe that Proctor lied to Sergeant Buchanan. He doesn't seem like he's above that at all. And that he downplayed his relationships so that he could get in there and, help in the way that we're suggesting he did. We being the defense, I agree with them. We also got into a ton of stuff about Brian Higgins. For the first time, we saw video evidence of Brian Higgins outside and going into the Sallyport and Canton PD. And we have never seen these before. They existed before, but they didn't happen before. So we see Brian Higgins on the phone. We clearly see his hand like this with a screen lit up. Now, Sergeant Buchanan said it looks like he might be holding a phone. I don't know if he's talking to someone. I don't know if he's just trying to listen to something like on a radio or something. It might be some kind of a small iPad. I'm not 100% sure. Okay, bro. Him going into cars in the parking lot area at Canton PD were all open, or he had key access to them. He did go into Canton PD before he went out to the parking lot. And what he had said he was doing at that time in the previous trial was moving cars for the snowplow that was coming in. He only really moved one car to my memory that actually got moved. He just went into all of the other cars and their lights turned on. But he didn't actually vroom them anywhere. But we got into additional text messages between Higgins and John O'Keefe. And what was interesting about this was that Higgins was telling John O'Keefe that Karen Reed was texting him in a flirty way. And was like, hey, this is happening. And he's like, I just don't want in on the drama. Bro, why do you keep texting her back? And that's what John O'Keefe responded with. Additional information that was happening during a voir dire that was made at Jackson's request. The jury was excused for an early lunch so that they could get the voir dire in. It was just a short little interview going over some questions. There were some very controversial answers about the harassment levels that the McCabe's and Alberts, he was very much victimizing them in his responses. And ultimately it didn't go anywhere because the judge, once it finished, the judge was like, I'm not letting any of that in. We're not doing any of that. Not with this witness, not here. Then we went to lunch. Then we got into the additional 22 pieces of taillight that Proctor had found. He was without objection allowed to be the one to bring in the evidence on redirect. So we finally got into redirect, and Brennan had him being the sergeant, the additional taillight. He was showing all the taillight, saying what the letters were that were in the thing. And it was like, who did this? It was Proctor. This is his handwriting. Yes, this is the same handwriting that's on the other bags. I would say it looks like the same handwriting, but I'm not an expert. And so, and all of these were found nearly a week later, 10 days later from the night of the incident. All these additional things that were not found in the previous evidence searches, but they were all found while Michael Proctor was alone. He was the only one who signed them in. He didn't log them into evidence. He didn't write a report about them. It was just some basic information about here's the taillight that was found. And to me, with all of the Brian Higgins video and text messages coming in through Sergeant Buchanan, additional text messages and evidence that was found by Proctor when he was by himself, admitting it. Sergeant Buchanan admitted that he did that by himself. I'm thinking that they're not going to bring Higgins or Proctor in. I'm really leaning towards that. And I think that's kind of an interesting choice. Now, Brian Higgins, he could be considered, this is just outside stuff, the defense has put in towards an argument of him being a third-party culprit. They're not allowed to get into that until the door gets opened. It has not been opened yet. And it might not get opened if they don't have Brian Higgins on the stand. And since all of his stuff has already come in, the prosecution is like, we can just avoid that whole mess. But Proctor, they don't have to, since this other evidence was allowed in without objection. But it's going to look bad. It sounds like it's going to look bad because since the opening statement of Jackson's was all about how Trooper Proctor had his mitts in everything in this investigation, and it was poorly done, not calling the lead investigator, even though it has already been informally mentioned, hinted, and suggested that he was fired. I mean, it was put up there directly, but I mean through witnesses. So I just don't think that not calling him is going to help. Not calling him also prevents him from being cross-examined because you know that Jackson's going to want to get in that like a grilled steak, okay? But it's also going to be, you already said he was your main case agent. He was involved in everything. How do you not call him and try to make that look okay and pass it off to the jury? And you want to know what we haven't gotten? A medical examiner. We haven't gotten anyone who actually says how or what John O'Keefe died of. I think that the rest of this week is going to be those experts, and I'm also fairly certain that we're going to be out of civilian witnesses. At least there might be one or two short ones, but I don't think that we're going to get into the rest of them. If they do not call Trooper Proctor former, I'm going to be crossing my fingers that we finally get a hostile witness call from Jackson to bring Proctor up. I do not know what steps or what things have to happen to allow a hostile witness, but I know it's a possibility that I hope we get. And hostile doesn't mean like angry, fighting, combative. It means that you even though they're calling the witness, which would normally be direct examination, they want to be allowed to ask him like it's cross-examination. So that's where we are, day 14, finally done with Sergeant Buchanan, at least for hopefully a while. And we're dwindling to the end of the prosecution's main case. And we'll see what tomorrow brings. Bye, my lovely humans.